Welcome to Sabbath Collective, a community of people interested in celebrating the Sabbath and pursuing God through a Hebraic worldview of the Bible. Tonight we're going to talk about something really interesting, and if you're like me, we can really relate to. It is the doubts of Thomas. Rabbi Akiva was one of the great rabbis in Jewish history. During Akiva's lifetime, the Romans made a law against studying Torah. And Akiva continued to study and teach Torah, for which Rabbi Akiva was arrested, tortured, and executed. But before his arrest, his students said to him, "Why do you continue to study Torah and teach Torah so publicly when you know you could be executed for this?" Rabbi Akiva answered, "There was a fox who sat looking into a stream, watching fish swim rapidly back and forth. And the fox said to the fish, 'Why do you swim like that?' And the fish said, 'We're trying to escape the nets of the fishermen, so we swim back and forth.' The fox said, 'Why don't you come out on the shore by me? Then you won't have to worry about the fishermen.' And the fish answered, 'Living in the stream with the fishermen is difficult, but imagine how much more difficult it would be if we went to the place for which we had not been created.'" Wisdom from that fish. Hey, Anita from Iceland watching. Good to see you, honey. Hey, Diana, great to see you. And Evelyn, I saw you as well. Alexandra, great to see you all. Our sister Anita is with her sister in Iceland in Reykjavik. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but having a blast over there. I'm really glad you joined us. So the fish is saying, we are safer even when there's a dangerous uncertainty, when we are functioning according to design. The Western worldview, most especially the Western church, looks at doubt as the counter to faith, a sort of doubt versus faith. They think either you have doubt or you have faith. It's one or the other, either or. So it suggests we somehow eliminate doubt if we want to have faith. Oswald Chambers says, "Doubt is not always a sign that a man is wrong. It may be a sign that he is thinking." The Hebraic worldview of faith completely embraces questions. Hey, Jean, great to see you. Shabbat Shalom. As you know, if you've been walking with us for a while, the Hebraic worldview loves questions. It's part of our learning to learn experience. And it even embraces questions that have no answers, or maybe several different answers. The Hebraic worldview knows that man has been designed to question, even when those questions cause doubt. A Talmud, which is the Hebrew word for disciple, of Yeshua, named Thomas, exhibits doubt. So let's look at the story. I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory. It is Passover, and Yeshua was crucified as the Paschal Lamb. His body was put inside of a tomb. Afterwards, before dawn, a few of the women followers had ventured out while it was still dark, and they had gone to the tomb to anoint his body with spices and ointments. But they had returned with a story. The tomb, they said, was empty. Yeshua's body was gone. So there was talk of angels and earthquakes from the women. They claimed to have seen Yeshua, and he said to them, "Don't be afraid. Go to Galilee and you will see me." So the disciples gathered together behind locked doors, afraid of their own death. But that evening something happened that would leave no one the same. Something that challenged everything they thought they knew about life and death. Suddenly, there he was, Yeshua, standing before them. In John 20:19 through 24, if you have your Bibles or if you're reading online, I usually use the complete Jewish version. It says this, in the evening that same day, the first day of the week, when the Talmudim were gathered together behind locked doors out of fear of the Judeans, so in other words, all the disciples were hiding away in their panic room, so to speak, because they were afraid that the Judeans would come after them, like at what just happened to the Lord, Yeshua. The text goes on, Yeshua came, stood in the middle, and said, Shalom Aleichem, which means peace be to you. The text goes on, having greeted them, he showed them his hands and his side. The Talmudim were overjoyed to see the Lord. Shalom Aleichem, Yeshua repeats. He says, just as the Father sent me, I myself am also sending you. Having said this, he breathed on them and said, receive the Ruach HaKodesh, which is the Holy Spirit. If you forgive someone's sins, your sins are forgiven. If you hold them, they are held. Now Toma, the name means twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Yeshua came. So here we have this backstory about what's happening here. But what happened here was Yeshua comes to move these fearful, hiding people out of their panic room, a room that was filled with shadows and fears and doubts. And this encounter did something in them to give them hope. But notice one really important thing with this story. Hey, Barika, Shabbat Shalom. One of the tribe is missing, Thomas. We really can't hear, or the Hebrew word Shema, which actually means hear and do, what the stories of scriptures are saying until we actually relate to them as stories about ourselves. The way we relate to Bible characters changes as we age and mature in our spiritual journeys. It's sort of like that crazy uncle that you used to avoid at family reunions when you were younger because he would talk about all these conspiracies and what the government was doing, and you used to think, man, that guy's just wacko. But now that you've aged, you realize he's probably on to something, and you find him interesting and even compelling. Sometimes people interest us more the older that we get. Thomas means twin. And I want to throw out there tonight that he's our twin. Thomas wasn't in the room with the others when they saw the Messiah was actually risen. Maybe Thomas needed to get some fresh air. Maybe he wanted to get away from the heaviness of that locked room. So maybe Thomas is sitting on a park bench feeding the pigeons. When he returns, however, to the group, the whole group begins to tell him. And they're probably all excited and talking all at once. You know how you get, right, when something happens. And verse 25, it says, when the other Talmudim told him, we have seen the Lord, he replied, and here comes Thomas's response, unless I see the nail marks in his hands, put my finger into the place where the nails were, and put my hand into the side, I refuse to believe it. So let me say this with the followers of Yeshua hearing him say this, what this purpose was, but never believing it would unfold like this. So, for instance, all the disciples heard Yeshua say, this is why I'm on earth. They all heard him say what his purpose was. But no one ever believed that it would look like this. Even though he did talk about giving his life and being the lamb and all this, no one ever thought it would happen like this. And so Thomas just couldn't believe it. So is it so strange that he would say, I need it proved to me? So let me ask you this, and as I'm talking, if you could maybe give me your comments. Why do you think he wanted proof? Why do you think when Thomas went to the rest of the Talmudim and they said, oh man, we saw the Messiah and he's alive. We saw Yeshua, he's risen. We saw him, he spoke to us. And he said, unless I touch the holes from the nails and the spear myself, I'm not going to believe it. Why do you think he wanted proof? And while you're commenting, I'm going to go on, but I'm going to check with you. As much as I'm interested in the man that has been labeled Doubting Thomas by so many, in his real and his personal expression of doubts, and his way to this revelation, I'm actually more interested in what happened when he left the group and then he returned. So this narrative may be more about the faith of a collective community than it is the personal doubts of Thomas. To focus solely on Thomas as an individual ignores the importance of the collective in this culture. Yes, we are individuals, and I'm going to get into Thomas in a little bit, but we've all been powerfully formed by our faith communities, and I don't want to miss that. Barika says Thomas was still understanding Messiah as someone who was coming as a more a human king. Exactly, Barika. Most of the people that were following him and understood messianic prophecies thought that he was going to come and restore Israel right then. Zionism was where their hearts were leaning, and they thought that he wasn't going to die, but in fact he was going to overcome this corrupt government and restore Israel and then restore the temple. And they thought it was going to happen then. So a lot of times people had problems with that. Good thought, Barika. Do you think that with him asking for proof too, it could mean that he actually wanted it? You know how when you're talking to somebody, you're trying to reason them and they say no way. Maybe you say to them, racism is really prevalent in our culture. And someone says, nah, I don't see it. I think people are being too sensitive. End of conversation. You've heard people do that, right? They don't want to know the truth. But with Thomas saying, show me and I'll believe it, it kind of suggests to us that he does want to know the truth and that he's hoping it is true. And so we can kind of infer that. Jerome Nere, who's a New Testament professor and a member of a group called the Context Group, and it's they work on a project on the Bible and its cultural environment. He writes this: the people in the biblical world are dyadic. This means that individuals basically depend on others for their sense of identity, for their understanding of their role and status in society, for clues to the duties and rights they have. So, in other words, the community shapes our worldview and where we fit in it. Hold on, I want to see what Miss Gwen says. Hey, Miss Gwen, I'm glad you're with Evelyn. Miss Gwen said he was probably doubting all along in his mind and needed proof at that moment. Really good insight. Gwen was suggesting maybe he's had doubts the whole time. And really at this point where his faith was really challenged, really needed to see. Good point. So these are all human reasons. So again, back to the community. The community shapes our worldview and, as this writer suggests, where we fit in it. When we discuss in the comments in our teachings, we are learning together through all the input and the perspectives. In contrast to that, our modern Western value of individualism says we have this sense of private spirituality. But where's the we learning? It's all individualized faith. This is to say, this Western way of thinking, no one can challenge my spiritual perceptions because I have the right to them and they are mine. You see, faith and the communities that faith is found in evolve. They grow. They change. They're always in motion. They're never static. They are a mosaic, almost like a kaleidoscope. All different pieces coming together as one beautiful picture, yet always looking different. Barika is saying it is good to fireproof leadership. Maybe Thomas was doing that as well. Good point, Barika. Absolutely. Alex is saying maybe Thomas had the heart of a scientist. Exactly. We're going to get into that in a little bit, which Alexander is a scientist. So she really relates to that. Great point. Hey, Glendalise. Good to see you, honey. So again, this picture of community and the power of it is all these different pieces, just like a kaleidoscope that you look at, all changing, all bringing their own beauty. This Western kind of private faith, my thinking, my understanding, is not only dangerous because its foundation is our own perspective in isolation. I'm going to say that again. Private faith, not only do we not see that in scriptures, we see that in this culture that we live in. Private interpretation, private application, private revelation. It is not only dangerous because its foundation is our own perspective in isolation that is not open to change. So let me ask you this. What can go wrong there? Our own private interpretation, private perspective in isolation that is not open to challenge. What can go wrong there? And I'm asking you to comment there. Perhaps Thomas, Terracotta, which I know that's your Facebook name. I'm not sure if Tara is your first name or not. I know you join us a lot. I'm sorry if that's just your Facebook name. But she is saying that perhaps Thomas was moved by their joy, but he wasn't experiencing that level of joy. Really great perspective as well, because he didn't feel the same thing. He thought, well, I don't get it. I'm not in. Hey, Ash, great to see you. Yes, absolutely. You can quote that, Alexandra. It's an interesting insight, right? So again, let's just go over it again. The Western kind of private faith is not only dangerous because its foundation is our own perspective in isolation, but it is not open to challenge. So not only is it private, we don't let anyone in. It's all up to our perspective, but we don't let anyone challenge it. And that is very dangerous. So this kind of private interpretation and application of our faith that we see today in our Western Christianity disconnects us from the understanding of the communal faith life of the ancient Hebrews. The fact that they actually experienced his presence together. They celebrated festivals together. They wrestled with and implemented God's laws together. They experienced loss together. This meant something in their learning. So when Yeshua appears to the group, he knows their fears and speaks and breathes peace. And new life came into them in this collective. They saw the truth. So we have to remember that our eyes are not the only thing we have for seeing. Alexandra says, can lead to one view of everything. Absolutely. This linear way of thinking, because it has no real foundation, which is the problem with Western thinking, right? And not a Hebraic worldview. So again, we have to remember that our eyes are not the only thing we have for seeing. So I live in Florida, and my eyes tell me the Gulf is blue, and it has tides and fish and dolphin that live in it. Those are truths that my eyes, my physical eyes, can see. But my eyes don't see that when I sit on its shores, I experience physiological, spiritual, and mental healing at the cellular level. That's a deeper truth that I see in my soul. And one of the best places to see a deeper truth from the soul is the truths that are seen within the community. And by the way, that is even a virtual community like Sabbath Collective, like what we have right here. But what happens when some members of the community are absent from a transformative learning experience? Well, when Thomas returned the following Sunday, the whole group dynamic among the Talmudim had changed. Thomas wasn't able to be part of what happened in the collective soul, so he didn't see the truth. And then it's interesting that he went right to the need for this tactile seeing and touching the facts. Let me touch, let me see. Because that's all he had. Just because he heard the others talking about it, he wasn't with them. And you don't necessarily believe everything you are told. Especially like Alex says, if you have a scientist's brain. Thomas couldn't see the truth of the risen Messiah through the collective soul like the others did, because he wasn't with the community. So people call him Doubting Thomas, a weak man who lacked faith. But now let's look at him as a person. So we looked at the communal element of this doubt. But now let's look at Thomas as a real person that really existed and really felt this. Thomas was not weak. He was not a weak man who lacked faith. There's a couple of things we need to know about Thomas to sort of fill out his personality profile. The first thing we need to know is Thomas was a real guy. He was the guy after the Passover supper when Yeshua said in John 14, and I'm going to kind of condense these verses, Yeshua says, "In my Father's houses are many places to live. I am going there to prepare a place for you. I will return to take you with me so that where I am, you may be also. You know where I am going and you know the way there." So these are the words of Yeshua, and he's saying them to his followers. Thomas speaks up at this point and says, no, we don't know where you're going. And how can we know the way if we don't know where you're going? So he's kind of a very honest literalist, right? Imagine this scene where all the Talmudim are nodding introspectively to those words of Yeshua, talking about a place and how they'll know the way there. And they're saying, yeah, man, that's really deep. And Thomas is going, nah, I don't understand a word you just said. Thomas speaks his mind. But once he gets it, he's all in. The second thing that we see about Thomas is Thomas was fiercely loyal. There was that time when Lazarus got sick and died. And Yeshua said, let's get up and go back to Judea. And all of the apostles said, wait, now wait a minute. The Jews recently have sought to stone you in Judea, so why would you go there? It was Thomas who spoke up. And he said, let us go with him also, that we may die with him. So, does Thomas have doubt and faith? He absolutely does. Why do you think they can both live in the same vessel? Why do you think you can have faith and doubt? If you have any thoughts on that, I'd love to read them. Faith is an often misunderstood, practical Thomas. Yes, that's exactly right. Faith is an often misunderstood word. The Greek word is pistis, and it relates to humans as the belief in a thing, a conviction or an assurance. In the Greek mindset, this presupposes that faith can be sort of acquired, like a noun that we would take and we would own it. But Hebrew actually has no kind of word for this kind of possession. In Hebrew, to have is expressed in the form of to be in relation to. In Hebrew, I do not have faith and I don't own faith like we know it. I am connected to it through my relational actions. So growing in faith means to grow in relationship and acting in kind. See, doubt is not incompatible with faith. The Western Church has taught that faith is a kind of religious certitude. Believe certain doctrines. If you believe these tenets of faith, if you walk an aisle, if you pray a certain prayer with certain words, then you have faith. What are some things, if I were to ask you, that you have been told are a lack of faith? What have you heard in the church when maybe you asked a question or made a statement where someone said, that's doubt and that's a lack of faith? Let's see if you've had any experience with that. What are the Hebraic roots of faith and doubt? Alex is asking. Actually, Alexandra, I'm not going to have them in this teaching tonight. However, Andre is going to teach next week, which is going to be awesome. And then in 2 weeks, I'm going to do a new series on just one Hebraic word a week. And the very first word I'm going to do is faith. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to do in 2 weeks is the Hebrew word of faith and what it means. So I'm really going to get into that. But good question. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke, who's actually a dude, even though his middle name is Maria, says, be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and learn to love the questions themselves. Yeah, Andre is teaching next week, Jean. we're jazzed about that. This is a really great quote as well. PBS's Religion and Ethics interviewed Barbara Brown Taylor about her book, Leaving Church. A really good book, really instrumental in my own life when I was going through a grave crisis and really was questioning where my place was and even what church was. And I read her book, Leaving Church, because I felt like I had to be ready to leave it and set it down before I could pick up what God was giving me that was new. And Barbara Brown Taylor left her parish ministry to teach at a university. And Bob Abernathy asked her if doubt had played a role. And her response was brilliant, Barbara Brown Taylor. Before I say it, Tara says, claiming that it is that if your prayer is not answered, it is because of doubt. Boy, that's a big one, right? Huge. If you don't get your prayer answered, it's doubt. Thank you, Alexandra. Let's look at this quote from Barbara Brown Taylor. She says, here's the way I presently live with doubt. Doubt often brings me to poke at what I believe. And when it topples, I realize it was an idol. And so doubt has been a divine gift that has led me deeper into God. That's just so amazing. Evelyn says, I've been questioning about doubting God's healing in regards to depression and medication. Right. And some of the things that sometimes we are told or doubt is if you get angry at God, if you question why things happen, or as Evelyn is asking why things don't happen. And we're told, well, that's doubt. And it is doubt. But is that a lack of faith? And I would suggest no, it's absolutely not. Glenn says, I think hope is what kept Thomas there even when he had doubts. That's exactly what I think too, Glenn. He was leaning into faith even though he had doubts. And that's why we absolutely know that faith and doubt can live in the same vessel. So John 20, 26 through 28 goes on and says, a week later, his Talmudim were once more in the room. And this time Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Yeshua came, stood among them, and said, Shalom Aleichem, peace to you. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here, look at my hands. Take your hands and put it in my side. Don't be lacking in trust, but have trust. And Thomas answered, my Lord and my God. Yeshua waits here, we read, an entire week until all the remaining disciples had all reconvened the following Sunday in the same house, this time with Thomas, so that Yeshua speaks to Thomas within the community. He could have caught up with him privately, but the gathered collective was important for this appearance. There's an important insight here in Thomas's search. He spoke his heart. And that act allows the heart to be open enough to see. You see, if we suppress things like, why don't you answer my prayer? Why do I have to take medication? If we suppress these doubts or pretend or deny our questions, we shove them down and we close up our heart. And our questions are sealed up and we cannot see any truths behind the walls that we've built. But if we open our hearts up and speak our experiences, our truths, our minds, here we see the benefit of the doubt. If we're always, as Glenn says, showing up, looking. He spoke his question in the community and Yeshua gave him the revelation in the community. And Thomas spoke his great insight to Yeshua, my Lord and my God. He gets it, he sees. Interestingly enough, we don't read that he touched Yeshua. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't need to. Because it was a communal seeing from the soul. The collective soul saw the truth, that he is the Messiah, and he didn't need what he thought he needed when he was experiencing this truth from the soul within his community. And his openness allowed him to get there, because doubt is often an element within faith. Madeline L'Engle, one of my favorite quotes, says, "Those who believe they believe in God, but without the passion in the heart, without anguish of mind, without uncertainty, without doubt, and even at times without despair, believe only in the idea of God and not in God himself." So powerful. Faith is not having all questions answered, all your doubts resolved. Faith is not even the absence of doubt. It's being faithful to our own hearts, to our relationship with Adonai, simply showing up and connected with our faith communities. Relational trust, not certainty. And then faith becomes an action. It is continuing to be open in our seeking. It is getting up and leaving the fear-filled, locked room and walking into the world with a message of hope as you know it. And that is what the world so desperately needs. We're going to close this time with the lighting of the Shavuos candles. I see that you're still writing in your comments, and please feel free to do that because everyone is reading everyone's comments, which is beautiful. We're going to close this time tonight. Traditionally, the mothers light the candles which connect us to the Sabbath light of peace and joy and unity. And then traditionally what she does is she encircles the candles with her hands 3 times. And that's a picture of her welcoming in the Sabbath. And it's the ending of the work week, which is the symbol of her covering her eyes from the flame as she prays, "Blessed are you, Yahweh our God, King of the universe, who has set us apart by his commandments, who has given us Yeshua the Messiah, and has sent us to be a light to the world. The Lord is our light and our salvation. May his light be felt in this space as the enlightenment of truth and the radiance of joy." So all of you fellow doubters filled with faith, don't lose heart. Keep showing up. Shabbat Shalom.